Windows in the gallery. In the balcony of the main chapel, the windows depict several Franciscan women who reflect all walks of life. Some were wealthy and came from nobility. One was a queen, another a duchess, while a few were very poor. Some led exemplary lives from childhood, while others experienced conversion and dramatic changes later in life. Some were married, while others dedicated their lives to the service of God and God's people. Each in her own way can be an example for us. In the larger window in the south balcony, we find Blessed Angela of Foligno, who lived from 1248 to 1309. Coming from an influential family, she married a rich man and raised their children. She was absorbed in the requirements of their social standing and had access to much wealth. At about age 40, she began reflecting on her life and the way she was being distracted from growing closer to God. She began a conversion process, during which time her husband and children died unexpectedly. She then began to devote herself to acts of charity, giving away her possessions to the poor and sick. She became a third-order Franciscan, and when all her money was gone, she began begging for funds for the poor. She often cared for the sick herself, as the window depicts her. Other women joined her in her compassionate work, and eventually they started a religious order for women. This window honors our sister's commitment to healthcare. She is commemorated in the church calendar on January 7th. Directly across from the window of Angela of Foligno, on the north side of the upper balcony, is another Angela, that is Angela Merici. This woman lived from 1470 to 1540 and was also a Franciscan tertiary. She was committed to helping young women who lacked skills and a dowry for marriage. Angela Merici began teaching these unmarried women so that they could take their place in society. In the window, Angela is seated on a bench in a garden and is surrounded by her students, young girls. When other women joined in this effort, she founded a new religious congregation called the Ursulines after Saint Ursula, one of her favorite saints. Angela's concern for the dignity of women is one that FSPA also embrace and proclaim in our direction statement. This window, companion to the one opposite, honors our congregation's commitment to education. Angela is commemorated in the church calendar on January 27th. Following along the north wall of the balcony, we come to the window of Margaret of Cortona, who lived from 1247 to 1297. Her own mother died when she was only 7 years old. Her stepmother disliked and mistreated Margaret so badly that she finally ran away from home. She lived with a young nobleman for 9 years. They had one son. One day, when her lover failed to return home, Margaret went out searching for him. A dog appeared and led her into a wooded area where she found his slain body. While this was a terrible time for her, she slowly found her way to the Third Order Franciscans and began a life of penance. She established a hospital for the sick poor and gathered a group of tertiary sisters to help care for them. Her son later became a Franciscan friar. Margaret led a holy life until her death at age 50. Her body remains incorrupt to this day, and she is loved as one of the great saints of the Franciscan order. She is commemorated in the church calendar on February 22nd. Hedwig, Duchess of Silesia, Poland, is featured in the next window. Born in Bavaria in 1174 to a noble family, she was married to Henry I, Duke of Silesia. They had 7 children. She was influential in government administration and was an effective peacemaker among warring nobles, especially her 2 sons, Henry and Conrad. Because of her position, she could further the religious life of the people of her country. She established monasteries and brought in several religious orders, namely Cistercian, Dominican, and Franciscan. In our window, we find Hedwig dressed in royal robes and holding a replica of a monastery she had built. Her daughter entered the Cistercian order and in time became the abbess. As a widow, Hedwig retired to a monastery where she lived until her death in 1243. However, she herself never became a nun. Hedwig is remembered for her courage, patience, and piety. She was proclaimed patroness of Silesia and is commemorated in the church calendar on October 16th. Blessed Crescentia, born Anna Hess in 1682 in Kaufbeuren, Bavaria, was the daughter of a poor woolmaker who could not afford the dowry required for her to enter a religious order, so she remained at home for a time. When she was 21, the Protestant mayor of her town intervened on her behalf, and she was accepted by the Sisters of the Third Order of St. Francis without a dowry. However, some of the sisters treated her unkindly and made her do menial work, which she accepted without complaint. With the passage of time, she was entrusted with several important positions within the community, where she served as portress, novice director, and eventually superior. She was known as a prudent spiritual director. She died in 1744. For some early years in our history, it was mistakenly believed that our founders came from Kaufbeuren, from the place where Crescentia lived, thus explaining her inclusion in our windows portraying Franciscan women who are important to our heritage. Even though it was later learned that our founders really came from Ettenburen, Bavaria, Crescentia, nonetheless, remains close to us in a deeply spiritual way. We truly rejoiced when she was declared a saint in 2001. She is commemorated in the church calendar on April 5th. The last window on the north side, close to the choir loft, is Rose of Viterbo, the patron saint of Rose Convent and Viterbo University. Barely 18 years old when she died, this young woman led an interesting and courageous life. A religious and prayerful child, she had a persuasive nature and encouraged others to live sincere and holy lives. She was a street preacher, not only in her hometown of Viterbo, but in nearby towns as well. She strongly desired to join the Poor Clares, the Second Franciscan Order, but was refused because she was too poor to bring a dowry, and also because of the notoriety surrounding her street preaching. She declared that after her death, her body would be entombed in the Poor Clare Monastery, and this happened as she predicted. Her body remains incorrupt today. There is great celebration in the streets of Viterbo on September 4th, the day she is commemorated in the church calendar. She is depicted here in the habit of the Third Order and is wearing a crown of roses. The basket of bread in her hands symbolizes her charity to the poor. Directly across the chapel from Rose, on the south wall of the balcony, is the window commemorating Colette, in habit with a lamb in her arms and holding a staff. Colette, who lived from 1381 to 1444, was born in France, and at 21 years of age became a Third Order Franciscan. She lived for a time as an anchoress, attached to a church in her hometown. Later, she responded to a call to join the Poor Clares and began to restore the Second Order to its original fervor and austerity. She became the abbess and established several monasteries of the Reformed Poor Clares. She is commemorated in the church calendar on February 7th. Next forward is the window depicting Hyacintha of Mariscotti, whose early life did not foreshadow any hint of sainthood. She was born in 1585. Her family had noble origins, and she received her education in a Franciscan convent, where one of her sisters was a nun. She became enraged when one of her other sisters had a marriage arranged for herself, one that Hyacintha had wanted for herself. Living with her became so intolerable at home that her family forced her into the convent, where she did make profession of vows, but was said to be really a nun in name only. She managed to lead a very worldly life, procuring for herself fine foods and comfortable surroundings. At one point, she became ill, at which time her confessor admonished her for her fine living while professing to be a religious sister. She repented, but soon returned to her comfortable lifestyle. When eventually God's grace did find its way to her heart, she truly undertook great works of charity, establishing confraternities to aid the elderly, the sick, and the poor, even begging for their needs. She was appointed novice director and was said to have a great deal of common sense. She is pictured here wearing a Third Order garb and holds a Bible with a skull on it, as it was her meditation on death that proved to be the turning point in her life. She died in 1640 and is commemorated in the church calendar on January 30th. Elizabeth of Portugal, born in 1271, is shown here in royal robes and crown, was the daughter of the King of Aragon and became the wife of King Denis of Portugal. After the birth of their second child, Denis became unfaithful, causing Elizabeth much suffering. Yet she remained faithful to prayer and devoted to the poor. She visited the sick, made clothing for the poor and vestments for the church, established orphanages, and provided dowries for young women. Her times were violent, with Christians and Muslims fighting each other. She became known as a peacemaker. She helped negotiate peace between her husband and his brother, and later between her husband and their son, Alfonso. When her husband begged forgiveness for his infidelity, she granted this graciously, and they lived together peacefully. After his death, she became a Third Order Franciscan and continued her charitable works. Her own death occurred in 1336, after a long and arduous journey for a final peacemaking effort between her son and grandson. Sometimes she is confused with her great aunt, Elizabeth of Hungary, for whom she was named. She is commemorated in the church calendar on July 4th. The last window on the south wall portrays Catherine of Bologna, who lived from 1413 to 1463. She joined the Poor Clares and served in the monastery in many capacities. She was a baker for several years and later became novice director. When a new monastery was established in Bologna, Italy, Catherine was sent there and served as abbess. In the window, she is portrayed wearing a habit and holding a palm in one hand and a book of prayers in the other. It is said that she illuminated this book. She has been declared the patron saint of bakers and of artists. She is commemorated in the church calendar on March 9th.